The AFC West is a division that has been owned by the Kansas City Chiefs the past couple years. However, I believe that every single team in this division is heading in the right direction. So in today's video, let's talk about the AFC West and do our division preview. So as I mentioned, we're going to be doing the division preview for the AFC West. In my opinion, this is going to be a division that is pretty similar to last year. I think it's pretty fair to say, just straight off the bat, the Kansas City Chiefs will likely win this division, assuming that they stay healthy. And even if they do have some injuries, this roster is just clearly better than both the Raiders, the Chargers, and the Broncos. But with that said, however, I do think that those teams that I just mentioned are actually getting better. It just happens to be that they're getting better kind of slow. So the way we're going to be doing this video is we're going to talk about each team for about 2 to 3 minutes. And then at the very end of the video, I'll do a full-on division preview. Now, before I hop into the video, around 93% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel, so make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button because that would mean a lot to me. But let's hop into the video. So as I mentioned, we're going to start off by talking about each individual team first, and we're going to start off with the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, last year, the Las Vegas Raiders went 8-9 and had a bizarre season, mainly in part because of the Josh McDaniels situation. Their head coach last year got replaced by Antonio Pierce, who is now the head coach heading into next year, and I do think that that was the right move. When you look at the roster is very similar to what it was last year, plus a couple of brand new additions. Offensively speaking, you brought in Gardner Minshew to be your potential starting quarterback. Right now, there is a battle between Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. I do believe that Aiden O'Connell will likely be the starter week 1, but I would not be shocked in the slightest if at some point this season Gardner Minshew does take the job. Both of these quarterbacks are seemingly just good enough to just be okay quarterbacks. I don't think any of these guys are franchise guys, but maybe I could be wrong on Aiden O'Connell. When you look at the weapons surrounding the quarterback position, you have a couple of interesting players, guys like Zamir White, Alexander Madison. Of course, you have Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker, Jalen Guyton, and so on and so forth. Obviously, the highlight of these weapons is, of course, Devontae Adams, who might just be the best receiver in the league. But I do personally believe that Jacoby Myers is an extremely underrated wide receiver too. I think on certain teams, he could easily be their wide receiver 1. Looking at the offensive line, it's a pretty similar offensive line to last year, except for the right side of the offensive line. Colton Miller again will be playing that left tackle position with Dylan Parham at left guard, Andrew James at center, then Jackson Powers-Johnson is likely, at least as of today, going to be put in there at the right guard position. And then at right tackle, you have Thayer Munford. I'm excited to see how this offensive line does. I think on paper, it's better than how they actually perform, but we'll definitely have to keep an eye out on that positional group. I forgot to mention the tight ends, but of course you have to mention the tight ends here. Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer is probably the best young duo of tight ends we've maybe ever seen. Brock Bowers obviously was the highly touted first-round pick for the Las Vegas Raiders this year. He's got unlimited potential to be a fantastic passing threat. Then you got Michael Mayer, who is also a really good passing threat, but a little bit more of your traditional tight end. I don't necessarily think it was the greatest pick in the world to take a tight end with your first-round pick when you took one last year with your second-round pick, but I do think when you're getting an ultra-talented player like Brock Bowers, I just kind of think you have to do so. Looking at the defense, it's essentially the exact same defense, plus you added Christian Wilkins. Your defensive line got extremely better with Max Crosby, who is already a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, and then of course Christian Wilkins. And then you have Tyree Wilson, your first-round pick from last year, who you're hoping could maybe make some noise this upcoming season. As I said though, the rest of the defense is for the most part the same. I don't really have a ton of concerns for the defense, but I do think that the secondary is a tad bit concerning. Right now you have Jack Jones and Nate Hobbs as like your 2 bona fide starting cornerbacks, with the rest of your guys kind of being unproven guys who really haven't been able to show much throughout their careers thus far. If I had to put money as to who I think will be that second cornerback alongside Jack Jones for your outside corners, I would imagine it's going to be Jacorian Bennett, but I could be wrong. So all in all, I think this is a really solid Raiders roster. I don't think it's perfect, and I think there are a ton of holes on this team, but I do think that they are heading in the right direction. Going out there and hiring Antonio Pierce to yet again be your head coach for the next couple seasons, and then bringing in guys like Gardner Minshew, Christian Wilkins, and in my opinion, having a pretty solid draft class, all does bode well for the future of this franchise. I do personally believe that this team is going to need a franchise quarterback within the next couple years, but maybe if a guy like Aiden O'Connell could prove that he can be that guy, then maybe I could be shut up about that. So in terms of how many wins I think this Raiders team will get, I can imagine them winning somewhere between 7 to 10 games next year. Last year they won 8 games with a pretty crazy season where they had to fire their head coach midseason, so I just think it's very likely that they'll be just as good, if not a tad bit better than they were last year. If Gardner Minshew does play at a high level though, I do think this team could maybe reach the double-digit win win mark with that 10 wins, but I think it's more likely they'll win like 9 games out of any of those possibilities. Next up, let's talk about the Denver Broncos. Last year, the Denver Broncos went 8-9 and had my opinion, a pretty underrated season, all things considered. And in this offseason, they had a pretty drastic overhaul of talent. They replaced their quarterback with Bo Nix. They replaced a lot of pieces on the defense and let them leave. And then they also fixed up a couple pieces offensively. I think it's pretty fair to say that the roster isn't as good as they were last year, because that was kind of the last year that team was riding with Russell Wilson and trying to go kind of all in. But this year they're riding with a young quarterback in Bo Nix, or potentially Jarrett Stidham if he does end up starting week 1. And I think that this is probably the right direction for this team. At the end of the day, they were not going anywhere with that roster from last year. And this upcoming season, you basically are running back a pretty similar version of what you were last year, plus a new quarterback, and then another year to develop under Sean Payton. I think that was the right move to make. In terms of if you're going to win 8 games this upcoming season, I don't think it's that realistic. At the end of the day, you're trusting a lot in a young rookie quarterback who was taken at the back end of the first round for a reason. At the end of the day, I think it's really hard to say that you're going to find a way to win an 8-game season again next year, because you are relying on a young quarterback in Bo Nix. I thought Bo Nix was a good player coming out of the draft, but I did not think that he was worthy of a top 15 pick. I had him as a late first rounder, but I also did understand why the Broncos took him when they did, because had they not took him at that pick, they would have had to trade up into the late end of the first round, and I don't think they had the assets to do so, nor should they. But it was also a pretty realistic possibility that a team like Las Vegas potentially just stood pat and took Bo Nix themselves. So I don't necessarily blame them for taking Bo Nix. I just thought I'd throw that in there. In terms of the offensive pieces surrounding Bo Nix, you obviously have Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, Jaleel McLaughlin. We'll see if Javonte Williams keeps that running back 1 position. I've been hearing a lot of rumors about him potentially being cut. Wide receiver wise, you have some interesting players with guys like Cortland Sutton, Josh Reynolds, Marvin Mims, and of course Troy Franklin. I think this is a pretty solid receiving core. It may lack a true wide receiver 1, because I don't believe that Cortland Sutton is a traditional wide receiver 1, but I do think the rest of the offense is pretty solid all around, so I think it's okay that your receiver 1 is a little bit lackluster. The offensive line is pretty solid, led by guys like Garrett Bowles, Ben Powers, Sam Mustipher, Quinn Miners, and of course Mike McGlinchey. I think Quinn Miners is one of the better right guards in the NFL, whereas I think the rest of the offensive line is pretty solid. So I don't think offensive line should be necessarily like a losing point for this team next year. Defensively speaking, I do think this team is better defensively than offensively. You have guys like Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers, Jonathan Cooper, and of course Baron Browning. I think for the most part, you're going to be able to get to the quarterback through a couple of exotic blitzes. That's kind of what this defense has been known for the past couple months. And I do think they're going to have to continue to rely upon their ability to get pressure through blitz packages, because I don't think there's somebody on this defense who is like a bona fide 15 sack per season type of guy. But if this team can find that guy, then maybe they won't have to throw out as much exotic blitzes. The rest of the defense is pretty solid. You obviously have Pat Surtain as your cornerback. Jaquan McMillan is extremely underrated. And I like your safety duo of Caden Stearns and Brandon Jones. So all in all, what's my prediction for this Broncos team? Well, I don't think they're going to be as good as they were last year. I think they'll win somewhere between 5 to 8 games next year. Assuming that Bo Nix does play at a fairly high level, then I think this is a team that could potentially be pretty similar to what they were last year. But I'm not going to make that assumption because he is a rookie quarterback, so I will assume that he's going to play at maybe mediocre or just okay at best. So I think that's more realistic for like 5, 6, 7 wins. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about the Los Angeles Chargers. This is a team that I've had a lot of mixed feelings upon the past couple weeks. Throughout certain points of the offseason, I've called the LA Chargers the worst team in this division, and then at other points, I've called them the second best. And as I sit here today, I still believe that they're one of the better teams in this division. Offensively speaking, you do, of course, have Justin Herbert, who last year was dealing with a plethora of injuries and now is going to be fully healthy this season. The rest of the offense is just okay as of today. I don't think that there's really anything to write home about, but I do like a couple of positional groups. Starting off with the running back position, Gus Edwards does appear to be the full-time starter for this team. I am interested to see if J.K. Dobbins can, one, stay healthy, but if he can potentially take over that running back 1 position. Assuming that it is Gus Edwards, though, I do think he is a good fit for, of course, the system they're going to be running. The wide receivers, while on paper don't necessarily shine bright, I do think are okay. You do have Joshua Palmer, Quentin Johnston, Ladd McConkey, and DJ Chark. Of all those guys I listed, I do think that Quentin Johnston is the one that this team is going to rely on the most to develop into becoming something. Because out of all those names, I don't think that any of those guys can truly be wide receiver 1 like guys, unless somebody like Ladd McConkey maybe potentially breaks out from what he has been kind of known to do. I like Ladd, but at the end of the day, he should never be your wide receiver one. He's a very small wide receiver, and unless you're going to use him like a Wes Welker, Cooper Kupp type of guy, I don't really think that that should be your receiver one. So I think this team will rely on their young guys like Quentin Johnston to develop into being a potential wide receiver one, and then of course Ladd McConkey can hopefully develop to be that wide receiver two. The offensive line though is pretty interesting. Of course you have your tackle duo of Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt that is going to be really solid next year, and then your interior should be okay with guys like Zion Johnson, Bradley Bozeman, and Jamari Salyer. I wouldn't necessarily say the interior of the offensive line is a strength, but I wouldn't also call it a weakness. It should be pretty fun to watch next year. I think offensively speaking, this could actually be one of the better units out there in the NFL, especially when it comes to running the football. Anytime you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert, you can't really stack the box against him, because if you do, he's going to do some play action passes that's going to throw it over your head. So I'm going to make the assumption that defenses are probably going to run some light packages against them, not necessarily like 5-man boxes, but probably like 6 or 7-man boxes to respect the arm of Justin Herbert, which I do think the Chargers can take advantage of with their offensive line and with their dynamic run game. Then you look at the defense, and I think that this is probably the weaker unit of the two. I don't really think it's that good of a unit all around. I think there's some talented players on this defense, such as Junior Colson, Asante Samuel Jr., Derwin James, Christian Fulton. But at the same time, I don't think that this is a defense that is ready to seriously compete in any sort of tough AFC. I think when you look at this defense all around, this is a defense that just sort of screams mediocre. There's some good players, as I mentioned, but I don't know. This is a defense that does not inspire me much at all. So last year, this team was the worst team in the division. They won 5 games, and I think a lot of that wasn't necessarily on the players. I think the system was horrible. I think the situation was bad. But at the end of the day, I do not believe this LA Chargers team is significantly better than they were last year. I don't think they'll be a 5-win team. I think they'll easily surpass that. But I would not expect this team to be making a deep playoff run, or honestly to make the playoffs at all. The rest of the AFC is absolutely stacked, and this division has a leader who is going to be the #1 team in this division for a reason. So with that being said, similar to the Las Vegas Raiders, I think this team is going to win somewhere between 7 to 10 games next year. 7 games, in my opinion, is a reasonable expectation for this team to hit as they sort of retool the rest of their roster. But if everything does go well, Justin Herbert sticks with the system that they're going to run, then yeah, this team could actually be pretty fun next year and potentially win like 10 games. But last up, we're going to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs, the best team arguably in the NFL. Last year, they only won 11 games, but of course, they would go on to win the Super Bowl, so to be honest with you, it does not matter at all what they do in the regular season. Their offense is absolutely getting better every single night, with Patrick Mahomes being the starting quarterback, Isaiah Pacheco the starting running back, Rashee Rice, Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy, and Kadarius Toney as your wide receiving core. Travis Kelce, Noah Gray, Jared Wiley are your tight ends. By the way, Jared Wiley's ultra talented, so I'm kind of excited to see what he can do. Then the offensive line is pretty similar to last year. Of course, the Joe Thuney, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith are still the same, but then you have Wanya Morris and Jawan Taylor as your tackles. That is probably the weak spot of this offense. But for the most part, when you have Patrick Mahomes, you're going to be fine. You're going to have a great offense. You're going to have everything you need. I'm not worried about the offense. Then you get to the defense, and it's kind of the same story as the offense. You have a bunch of stud players like George Karlaftis, Chris Jones, Drew Tranquill, Nick Bolton, Justin Reed, Trent McDuffie, so on and so forth. There really is not a ton of glaring holes on this defense. If you want to make any sort of complaints, you could say that their right cornerback position is a little bit questionable, because right now you have Najee Johnson and Jalen Watson kind of fighting for it. But let's be real, it's not going to be the downfall of this team. This defense is absolutely stacked. And when you have a head coach and a defensive coordinator like this team does have, you're going to be set up for success every single game. I don't see a world where this Kansas City Chiefs team does not win the division. Again, they won 11 games last year and still found a way to win the championship, so I think they're going to be pretty similar to what they were last year, if not a tad bit better. I will say this, I do think the receiving core will be better next year, so that does bode well for this franchise, and yeah, I think they're probably going to win like 11 or 13 games yet again. This team has too much talent, they have too good of a quarterback and too good of a head coach. It's just unfair for the rest of the division. But alright, we talked about each team. Let's now do our full-on division preview. I think this one is actually really easy to talk about. Obviously, the Kansas City Chiefs are the cream of the crop of the entire NFL. They're the best team in the league for a reason. They got the best quarterback. They're going to be #1 with somewhere over 11 games next year. Then I think in second and third is sort of a toss-up between the Las Vegas Raiders and the LA Chargers. I think both of these teams have a lot of talent, and I just personally trust Justin Herbert more than I do with Aiden O'Connell. But what I will say is I do think the Raiders roster is better than the Chargers. I just personally care more about that quarterback position. So I'll put the Chargers at 2 and the Las Vegas Raiders at 3. It could definitely be flip-flop though. And then I think in last will be the Denver Broncos. This is not a bad thing by any means. This is a retooling, rebuilding phase for the Broncos. They're finally committing to it. You have Bo Nix, who's going to be a young quarterback who we should all be excited for, and I think this team is heading in the right direction. Again, as a whole, I think this division is going in the right direction. You have 3 teams below Kansas City that are all slowly making improvements to maybe compete with the Chiefs within the next couple years. And as it goes for the Chiefs, again, you're the cream of the crop. Just kind of stay the course, and you're going to be fine. But if you guys agree or disagree with any of the points I made in the video, let me know in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. But I love you guys. Peace.